Okay. Forgive me, the Bay of Pigs ended with $53 million that America paid to Cuba, to Castro, to release the 1,200 insurgents who had been caught by the Cubans. It was $53 million in food and medicine. It was very embarrassing for Kennedy, and he never stopped trying to kill Castro, even though he said he was going to. And there were radio ads and all sorts of attempted propaganda at turning people against Castro because he was communist. And again, America feared nothing more than communism. Oops. Okay. And this led to what was called the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. Nikita Khrushchev from the Soviet Union installed a nuclear missile site in Cuba. The United States and Kennedy turned around and installed a nuclear missile site in Turkey, which is on the doorstep of the Soviet Union, facing Russia. And it led to a 13-day serious freakout between these two nations. The presidents, Kennedy and Khrushchev, literally were sitting around with their finger on the nuclear button, just waiting to push it. And finally, tensions eased. They both backed down. Khrushchev decided to pull his nuclear weaponry out of Cuba. Kennedy promised not to send nukes from Turkey over to Russia, over to the Soviet Union, and a direct line between the presidents was made so that in case of an emergency, they could talk to each other directly. But this 13-day period, people all over the world, especially in the United States, were really, really scared because of how close Cuba was to America. And this is Castro, and this is a cartoon image of Khrushchev and Kennedy. Obviously, both of them have their arm wrestling, and they both have their finger right above the nuke button. And that was really a very real image for a lot of people. A lot of people think of Castro as an evil character. There were plenty of things that he did not do that he did do that were very, I would say, not positive, to put it mildly. But he did a lot of things that many of his people benefited greatly from. Okay. And now in Afghanistan, we have another Cold War that turns hot. Marxism started to spread in Afghanistan, and the leadership there turned to communist philosophies with land reforms to help more people, removing private ownership from very wealthy and allowing more people more access to working land and having jobs and sustaining themselves. And of course, communist philosophies also liberate women in a lot of ways. Women under this leadership were allowed to come out of the home, again, get jobs, and show their faces in public, which I think is a really big deal. And the Soviet Union, the USSR, backed this group of people that came into power. Of course, Afghanistan is an Islamic state, and there were many religious Muslims in Afghanistan that really did not like these reforms, in particular because of the women's liberation movement. And unfortunately for the leadership there, the Arab Mujahideen, who included allies of Osama bin Laden, who eventually turned to become parts of the Taliban by 1996. They were a very strict version of Islam, and they believed women belonged in the home, and they were backed by America. Osama bin Laden and his men were trained and armed by the United States because the leadership was communist, and we in America thought that there was no bigger threat to America than communism. So we literally trained the Taliban, which I'm not sure if you all realize, but we have been fighting them for many years, since at least 2001, since 9/11. Okay, and then this, of course, led to America becoming a quote unquote national security state with a military industrial complex. What does this mean? When America is threatened in a grave way, we put away all of our needs for freedom and liberalism and rights. Free speech is squashed. Rights of humans don't matter as long as the whole state, the whole country, the whole nation can be protected. And Eisenhower literally called America, Eisenhower was our president at the time, and he literally called America a military industrial complex because we were just building and building our military in order to combat the communists. And this led to his power, his presidency becoming an almost imperial state. He was almost like an emperor because he had so much power. Because when we are in a crisis state, we don't have time to consult other people. We don't have time to talk to Congress and the House and the Senate and to vote on matters of protection of Americans and America. If it's an emergency situation, the president has the right to do what he thinks is necessary to protect his people. And that's exactly what Eisenhower did repeatedly. This, he also warned, would turn into something dangerous if it wasn't checked very quickly. And I think we still see today how much power a president of the United States has. Another thing that happened during this Cold War was called McCarthyism, and this was a quote-unquote crusade against communist influence within the United States. What does this mean? Anyone who is considered a communist, who had feelings or thoughts that might be related to communism, who didn't think that communism or socialism was the worst thing in the entire world, they had to be taken down because they were a threat from within. These were people who were considered almost like spies or enemies of the state from within. And McCarthyism led to some crazy actions within the United States. Neighbors told on neighbors. People couldn't go to the grocery store and look at the wrong magazine or the wrong newspaper without other people saying, oh, look at what they're looking at, and I'm going to tell the government so that they can be removed from our system. And if you had a friend who you knew was a communist and you didn't turn them in, you too could be blamed and cited for treason against the United States. So McCarthyism was an extremely scary time to have opinions other than mainstream ideas. And this is just an example of the fear that was provoked by the idea of communism coming into America. This is tomorrow. The world is on fire. There's terrible things happening here. And this is what America would look like under communism. And our flag is burning, our symbol of national pride, the one thing that everyone recognizes across the globe, is being destroyed, burned. And that's just very, very sad. And this is what's going to happen if communism grows. I'm going to look at a few clips from a few films here, which are basically clear forms of propaganda against communism and against the communist threat. And something important to realize is that when we have a huge outside threat, then our civil liberties are removed. No political dissent was allowed anywhere, and you couldn't say in your own family your own beliefs if you thought that maybe one of your family members would turn you in for being a communist. Let's take a look at a couple of these clips.
And is vastly more important in democratic societies.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
By the early 1950s, Communist Party membership had declined considerably, but Cold War propaganda inflated its threat to fantastic proportions. An evil so pervasive that the whole society had to be mobilized to combat it.
May Day brings a wave of anti-communist sentiment as 100,000 march down New York's Fifth Avenue in a loyalty parade. Everyone from vets to youngsters reveals his inborn dislike of communism. A united answer to those menacing our country's liberty.
Sergeant, check the kitchen. You look in the back. I'll be upstairs. Hey! What is this? Where do you think you're going?
We have no time for explanation. Already we are 15 minutes behind schedule.
Yeah, who sent your why? You're not going to take another step until I see your warrant.
Warrant? We need no warrant. As a member of the Young Communist League, your daughter has volunteered for farm work. She's to be transported immediately. The truck is waiting outside.
You say my daughter volunteered?
That is correct. Here's the signature. Requesting transport to the People's Club.
The signature on that piece of paper is false. And everything you've said is a lie because my daughter would never leave here of her own free will.
Sergeant!
You've got no right to be in this house. I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to get out of here.
Daddy? It's true, Daddy. I did volunteer for farm work.
Linda, why?
The party convinced me that I should free myself of the lingering bourgeois influence of family life. I am ready. Do not interfere. It is for my own good.
And Comrade Donovan, do not think that your deviationist remarks shall be overlooked. It will be reported to the proper authorities.
Frightening, isn't it?
That was a U.S. government film, in case you didn't get that, which is pretty amazing. The government and America in general was really, really scared about the threat of communism and did everything that they believed was necessary to ensure that people turned away from communism. And this was called McCarthyism in the at the time. Oops.